And this principle is effort intent. Now, effort always sounds like it means, as we know it, in a regular kind of way of exertion, of doing. And this is a strange translation from the German word that Rudolf Laban used to describe qualities of movement. And for the purposes of today, we're not going to go into the history of translation from German to English and all of this. We'll just play with the idea of the principle of dynamics, actually, of dynamic qualities, and visit some of the different qualities that we maybe use already, and then maybe exaggerate them a bit, because it's a bit like increasing your vocabulary and having more words to choose from. Just having a greater range of dynamic variation is useful to kind of visit and develop. So this principle is very much about the how of movement. We dealt in other sessions with the where or the what, and this is just the how. No matter what you're doing, what are the qualities that are occurring and appearing and transforming in whatever it is that you're doing. And we have 4 motion factors to deal with, and these are sometimes referred to as inner attitudes towards flow, weight, space, and time. And I'll just name them and then we'll move them. So the inner attitude towards weight is this inner attitude towards intention. So your sense of force, really, that you're here and you're present, and is that with a very strong amount of pressure, or is it much more of a light touch, which is still saying, look, here I am, and I can be very present with my intention, but with a very light presence, as opposed to a very strong presence, or force, or usage of your body. And then the inner attitude towards flow is progression. Are we going to progress freely, uninterruptedly, with a sense of ongoingness and continuity, or will there be lots of pauses, breaks, sense of control? So we have this free flow and this kind of bound flow. If I'm going to put my contact lenses in, I would use bound flow. It does not do to use free flow, you know. Many actions require different kinds of qualities, and some actions you can do with many different qualities and still get roughly the same effect, and some of them absolutely not. The inner attitude towards time is this question of decision. The inner attitude of when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen now, instantly, with quickness? Or is it going to happen slowly? Or maybe never at all. It just lingers and delays and dissolves and decreases, diminishes. So with quick time, it's over in a flash. It's accelerated and then it's gone. You know, it's very sudden in our attention. And sustaining we call it sustained time, but this is a misleading name, because to sustain something means to keep it going. And sustained time in this category actually means this real indulging in the time and taking the time. And that can mean slowly, but it also means getting more slow as well. And when we're looking at this quality of movement question, when we see a change, when we see some sort of transformation, then we're seeing a quality in motion. We're not just seeing something being held and continued. And we're looking for the pattern, for the change, really, to see what we can do with that. And then the inner attitude towards space, which has to be differentiated from kinespheric space, the space of the body or the space of the room. The inner attitude towards space is this question of attention. Am I going to pay attention to one thing or everything? And I include nothing also. Like, I choose to, pay attention inwardly. If I close my eyes and sense inwardly, this is an attitude of attention inwards. Laban did not talk about it in these terms, but I think in terms of space and this sort of outer attention, we can think of one thing or everything, or like just inwards. And then when sometimes when you close your eyes, you can still hear things around you, and you definitely have a sensory capacity to attend without sight. But that's not necessarily something that you could see in your movement necessarily. Maybe if you have your eyes closed, you hear a sound and you flinch, then yeah, sure. There's a sense of responding qualitatively to an outer source, and your qualities have changed. But with the space effort of looking at just like one thing, we see it very clearly when we see someone pointing, or cutting something very small, or gesturing somewhere. We see the relationship of me indicating a particular point in space, sure, but also an attitude towards that direction. It's not just indicating, it's having a kind of a relationship to it. And then when we say indirect attention, it means trying to take in everything at once. A sense of scattering, spreading, accessing the peripheral vision, scanning, surveying. I mean, surveying is also kind of maybe a series of direct attentions, but those moments where it's, you know, you're in the, although I haven't been in a railway station for a while now, but if you were to look up for the board and try and see your train, your journey, there is this moment of having to go wide to take things in and then to refocus. So that kind of, that little change is a kind of expression of space effort. Okay, theory over. Let's come to standing. And so this effort intent, or this question of qualities of movement, is very much related to feeling, you know, all these shifts and changes and feeling. And people also refer to emotion as like energy in motion. So we might think of it in terms of just constant transformation of what we take in and what we send out. Start taking a little wander in your space, allowing your body to wake up. Not sure what you've been doing so far already today, but just seeing what your body is calling for, what kind of movements feel pleasurable, interesting. So it's a sense of an arriving dance, moving to be here, to connect with yourself. Sometimes connecting with yourself can be through self-touch, reminding yourself of your volume, of your three-dimensionality. Sometimes it might be stretching your limbs. Sometimes it might be useful to wake up a sense of proprioception by giving yourself something to find a bit of balance, to take one leg off the ground. And, okay, here I am in space on one leg. Can be also nice, but also quite difficult if your space isn't very big, to take a little stand, pour the weight, fall a little bit. But if you don't have space to travel, you wouldn't really have so much space to step, but you can still fall and plant your weight a little bit, just to feel the fluid contents of your body falling, being caught. Getting the breath going. And arriving, connecting, sensitizing movement. Not really about composing anything or setting something down that you're going to revisit. More just allowing one thing to become the next thing to become the next thing. And now actually shift your attention to maybe the thing that you're doing right now, and you could repeat it if you like doing it, or it might not be that movement, it might be something else, but you just give yourself one movement to do that you could repeat. You might not be sure what that is yet until you kind of find it, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'll just carry on doing that. That's the thing I'm just going to carry on doing. And if it varies a little bit, it varies a little bit. But that's the sort of baseline that you're going to play with for now. So with this little phrase, we're talking very small, right? Really something repeatable. With this little phrase, get to know the time of it. Does it have a change of time? Does it have moments where you accelerate and where you decrease and linger? And as you're doing it, it might change. So it's quite hard to identify it once it's been done. So give yourself the invitation to mess it up a little bit by changing the sense of the time and the decision of it. has a shift of weight, when does that take place? If it has a swing, could you interrupt the swing, interrupt the flow of weight to a different kind of phrasing? So, finding in it some quite strong contrasts between how you're using your time. And other qualities are going to get involved in this, that's totally fine. But I'm inviting you to pay attention to the when. And again, the movement might transform a little bit, it might become something else. But feeling for yourself what this manipulation of time brings you. Nice. So hold on to this movement. We might come back to it later, but then just let it go in your body, but like try and vaguely remember it in case we want to pick it up later. Take another little stroll. Something that's not about manipulating time. It might be more connecting to sensation of skin. Something that's connecting for you. For some people, connecting can mean going in, closing your eyes, sensing your breath. For some people, connecting can mean opening eyes, seeing the space, feeling grounded in the sense of like where you are in the space. Okay. Maybe come to sitting and play around at the mid-level in sitting. So by playing around, I mean shifting from one side to the other side, maybe coming to all fours, finding different bases of support, but more at this kind of middle level of the space, no longer standing, not quite lying on the floor. And then go ahead, we're going to do the same thing, find a movement that is repeatable somewhere at this middle level. Probably the whole of your body involved, not just some gestural action. Try and involve more of your body. So finding a little phrase, a little movement could be fairly short, but enough to give you something to play with, let's say. And as you do this, let's come into the quality of strong weight. Whatever it is you're doing, can you increase the pressure in what you're doing? So it might increase a little bit and then decrease. Or it might be a single moment of very quick, strong. And what happens to the movement if you really increase your strength with it? It might change the time. It might change the actual coordination of where the movement starts. And then take the pressure off. So making it less, well, kind of middle pressure, not so strong anymore. And then see if you can connect to a feeling of lightness in the action. So whatever it is that you're doing, can you do it with as light a contact with the ground as possible? And light pressure we can often feel by maybe contacting the ground really lightly or touching your own body really lightly. So there's a sense of floatiness, maybe, a sense of air. Noticing that you can do this similar action to what you were doing before with a different quality of lightness. And what does that give you? What does that bring you in feeling as well as in the movement experience? And then go back to strong again. Noticing what happens. And use that sense of strong weight on the ground to bring you eventually back to 2 feet. And revisit the first little phrase that was more about time. And add some weight to that time. It might be lightweight in quick time. It might be strong weight in quick time. It might be strong and sustained, with this sense of slowing and lingering. Or it might be strong, it might be light and sustained. So playing with this combination of time and weight, of decision and intention. And it might become something else and your movement doesn't have to stay repeating in the same thing. Sometimes the container of the repetition is useful to investigate, and sometimes can feel a bit overly contrived. Like, okay, I don't know why I'm repeating this anymore, I'm just gonna change it to something else. But then when you when you make that change, that there is some sort of, maybe some sort of connection to the previous thing. We can talk about gradual change and abrupt change later, maybe. Going from strong to light. It's quite abrupt, but we're going to travel through that change of the pressure maybe to get there. Cool. So, coming back down to the floor. And let's find a little rolling. And finding rolling with a sense of connecting to the fluid contents of your body. Remembering that we are more than 70% water. That fluid content of our bodies can allow us to pour our weight into the ground. Coming into an awareness of your skin as you connect to your sense of fluidity. And we can come into an awareness of the ongoingness of this fluidity. We have obviously the heart pumping the blood, the breath moving that oxygenated blood around, every single cell pulsing. You can find eventually a little heel rock here, activating a bit of weight with this flow, anchoring into heels, flexing and extending at the ankle joints. Feeling the ongoingness of heel rock, up to go down, down to go up. Softening the organs in front of the spine. Relaxing the jaw and the tongue. And slowing it down, slowing it down. Slowing it down till eventually finding a stop. And lying on the ground in more of a passive weight state. And then begin to make single actions of joints. I mean, we can start very simply with a slide of the heel towards the sitting bone for a thigh lift. This is a very precise movement I've just thrown in there. But you can find a sense of relaxation and passive weight each time. And then maybe exhaling, folding one knee, standing the foot, allowing the weight to let go into a passive weight position, or state rather. And then to straighten the knee, or extend the knee, finding just a lengthening of the leg. You can start to add a little bit more control into this. So maybe your legs start more in parallel. I was starting with mine really externally rotated from a very passive place, but I can bring them into parallel. Find the end of the exhale, float my knee. My phrasing is quite even. I have a little bit more of sense of control over where my leg is going. Trying not to include much movement in the pelvis to make this happen. So I'm controlling my thigh lift, or my pre-thigh lift, and controlling the return. And we can call this using a little bit more bound flow. I'm not using so much bound flow that I can't move, but I'm using a little bit more precision in how I'm using my body's progression, how the movement is progressing, and being more precise about its beginning and ending. And I can take that same movement of heels tracking to sitting bones, now with my legs in this externally rotated position. And I can find actually a little bit more similar to the heel rock, a bit more free flow in the action, and as you see, a bit more quick time. How is it to flex and extend one and the other and see what happens to the spine with less control of my limbs? So I've got a kind of rock going on. As one heel extends, the other one flexes, and I can feel how that brings my pelvis with it, and my head might roll to one side and the other side. So there's a different coordination happening as I free my flow into this, no longer quite so controlled. And I don't think I could stop at any moment particularly easily if I wanted to. I then had to really bind my flow. Maybe you can give yourself the option of interrupting yourself to see what happens. And then go back to down with the legs. How it feels to slide in a really different sense of flow to the other version of pre-thigh lift. And I can feel this underlying head-tail rock as a result of my legs sliding in and extending. So that's an example of how free flow and bound flow can be used in this pre-thigh lift as a way of finding a different muscular coordination, but also a different experience of flow. And they both go together, right? So there's kind of how much of the musculature can be involved, how much release, how much control. Flow is more of this existing on a continuum. Okay, let's play with a free flow rolling to the side to a small ball. riding the flow of the inhale to spread yourself to your back. And then rolling to the other side. Pouring the contents of your container. Flowing over to one side. And you can allow this fluid X's and O's to open you to your side. Or open you to your front surface. Or flow you up to sitting into a small ball. And so free flow here means the participation of all of you, not going into kind of a passive collapse where maybe it's only the pelvis working and the rest is flopping along. In this free flow, I am still active through all my limbs. I'm just seeing that that can coordinate with a little bit more ease. Even if I do it slowly. How can I have this ongoingness through all of my body? And then let's try it with a little bit more control. So same folding of the limbs, rolling to the side. But how is it to do it with a little bit more control? And for me, that means slowing down. And maybe that means that you can sense more of the weight shift. Which parts of you are leaving the ground or connecting to the ground. But again, bound flow means still moving, doesn't mean entirely stopping. But there is a sense of control, so much so that you know that you could easily stop at any moment. Whereas the free flow can sometimes run away with you and feel a little bit more out of control, and so it might be harder to stop. Or at least you have to use a different change of musculature, different kind of speed of switching on. Okay, so from X's and O's, give yourself a little play of coming up out of the floor, back into the floor. We can roll, we can push, we can roll and circle. By taking the head and the arm with you. And let's find this with a little bit more gradation of flow and time. You might find indulging in time with control, or finding something more quick and free, or more quick and controlled. So it's up to you how much the movement is progressing as you change level from low to sitting. And you're playing with the decision of when things happen. And I'm using quite a lot of rolling, that X's and O pattern, as an underlying way of giving me something to kind of change into and change from. But if you find yourself doing some other movements entirely, it's totally fine. The emphasis is on playing with progression freeing your flow or controlling your flow, and decision of when something happens. This combination of flow and time has a name. It's also mobile state. And we did a bit of the pre-thigh lift, which might be helpful to change where you are. So one more minute of exploring flow and time for yourself. And because you have two kind of ends of the spectrum of both the flow and time, it's up to you when you make the change, how you recuperate from one thing with something else. So if you start feeling a bit dizzy or a bit sick with all the free flow rolling, you can recuperate with a bit more bound flow, sustain time. Feel like you've been going slowly for ages and it's starting to feel somehow monotonous. Reactivate with a bit of quickness. Okay. And let's open the eyes if the eyes are closed and bring in a little bit more attention to the space around you. Drop time a bit. Carry on playing with your flow, the progression of the movement. One thing pouring into the next, into the next, into the next, or more a sense of controlling where and how and what is happening. And it's up to you now whether you're directing your attention to one thing as you move or seeing everything around you. And it might help to have a sort of quality of fascination, as if you're seeing your environment for the first time. Ah, a jug. So how is it to activate this seeing that then gives you an attention with your body to move towards, or to send your intention towards, even if you don't travel. And those things might be very near to you, or they might be further away. And your attention might be with a lot of flow, free flow towards something, or with a bit more control. Directing your attention precisely, or directing your attention with a sense of ongoingness, outward streaming, somehow a little bit more abandoned or scattered. So paying attention to the things around you. And that can be easily done with the eyes and with the hands or with the fingers, and see if more of your body can get involved. Yeah, and you might come off the floor, you might still be very low to the ground, it's up to you. And if it feels like you're staying in direct space a lot, remember to open up your eyes, open up the gaze. See the space around you, take it all in. It's pretty fleeting, it's over in a moment. Once you've seen it, something else is bringing in your attention. You can't keep seeing everything all at once for a long time. It's really done in a flash and then it's over. Let's come down to the ground again and play with some sagittal and lateral pelvic shifts. We can play actually with lateral pelvic shifts sitting. We could bring the pelvis up and carry it sideways and put it down. Lift it up, or rather press into the hands and the feet to lift it up so the pelvis could feel quite light. Travel back to the middle, put the pelvis down. So we'll do it more precisely lying on the ground, but just to get that feeling of, okay, if I take the pressure into my hands and my feet, my center of levity could become quite light. So going ahead and sensing this pouring of the weight and then adding on more lightness through pelvis. And that pelvis could travel sideways. Okay, so more classical Bartenieff style, we go down to the ground. And we can find, first of all, gentle lifting of pelvis and putting it back down. And I'm lifting my pelvis without tucking my pelvis. So I'm not really losing the space underneath my lower back to do this. I'm not kind of curling up like this. I'm just taking the pressure into my feet and out of my pelvis to lift pelvis off the ground. Come into this patch of light, maybe you can see a bit more. So, very easily exhaling, lifting my pelvis, putting it back down. Taking the time with the length of the exhale to feel the weight pouring into the feet. Pressure changing across back of shoulders, maybe even back of skull. And next time you lift your pelvis off the ground, let's travel the pelvis ever so slightly sideways. And then put your pelvis down then. Same feeling as before, except now your pelvis is slightly off to the right. Standing through the feet, lifting pelvis up, traveling pelvis back to where it started in the middle, and putting it down. And when you carry your pelvis sideways, it's really only going so far as it can go before something starts to tip or to tilt. So it's pretty small. And you can use the bones at the top of the legs, the greater trochanter, these knobbly bones on the side. You could use those as a guide in your mind's eye if it helps to visualize kind of axle traveling from one to the other and out towards the sides. This is going to help connect your mind's eye to the pelvic floor, to quite a low part of pelvis. Lifting pelvis and traveling along this line. Putting pelvis down. And you can do this with absolutely no activation through pelvic floor at all. But let's see if we can activate a little bit through pelvic floor. And obviously there's more going on than just pelvic floor. We're trying to access the deeper postural muscles of the psoas, connecting us from the inner thigh. So the other side of the knobbly bone that you can touch is a smaller one. And that's where this long, deep postural muscle connects through the bowl of the pelvis, all the way up into the back of the ribs and the back of the diaphragm. And we're inviting this very subtle rotation for the heads of the thighs, the heads of the femur, into the pelvis, into the two hip sockets. And so now I'm using quite a lot of control, quite a lot of band flow, but not so much that I'm really tensing in my jaw and my shoulders. As much as I'm trying to keep my pelvis parallel with the ceiling and not tip or tilt anything, I'm also not trying to overly grip anywhere, like my feet or in my, I don't know, in my belly too much even. Sure, my thighs are doing something, but I'm really not trying to make them work a lot. How can I do this actually with a sense of almost laziness? What's the minimal amount of effort I need? And so it's not really lazy, but economical. Okay, that's enough of the small lateral pelvic shift. Let's find sagittal pelvic shift now. Bring your heels a little closer to your sitting bones so we're not super far away. And this time, similar principle of lifting the pelvis, and it's not really tipping or tilting, but instead of going sideways, you're going to carry your pelvis more towards your feet, but it's off the ground, and then put it back down again. So it's a very small action, sending pubic bone kind of upwards and forwards relative to where your body is, or forwards and downwards relative to where your body is in the kind of body key rather than the room key. So pelvis is coming off the ground a little bit, traveling towards your feet. And then you'll reverse that journey to bring your pelvis back down again. So maybe we can play with this with a sense of free flow and direct space. And maybe directing skull headwards to bring you back. Or maybe it is more helpful to have a sense of time here so it doesn't become too belabored in your hamstrings. Right at the end of the exhale, a little quick and lightness, quick light. And maybe a sense of free flow and sustained time to bring you back. And it might feel a little unsteady between your 2 feet if you free or flow more. So maybe let's activate a bit of strong weight and see what happens here if you find a lot more pressure into the air. And we start to feel this kind of correspondence between the inner attitude and also the kind of muscular effort of your own body. So sometimes I'm referring more to fluids, sometimes I'm referring more to muscles and to bones. There is no one correlation between these qualities and these body systems, but it's interesting to see what happens. I condense my weight and find strong weight in my body. and in my intention, what then changes in the movement? Maybe that's enough sagittal pelvic shift for now. Go ahead and recuperate however you would like to recuperate. For me, it's maybe more rolling, changing my level. And after you've recuperated with something that was not that, join me on your front. So rather than mobilizing pelvis, let's go ahead and mobilize limbs and spine, find a bit of lateral condensing or kind of body half action. So I'm flexing my elbow towards my knee towards my elbow, finding a flexion of the whole spine to that side, turning my head, seeing my hand. And let's play with a little bit of qualitative shift here. Let's find an accent more at the end of the action. So I can start it off and then somehow punctuate the end. And by the end, I mean the kind of nowhere else to go when I'm fully flexed. And then finding that transition, and then I hit the other end. Let's put an accent somewhere else. Now, maybe let's put an accent on the extension of both limbs, and I'm in the middle, and then I'll carry on to the other side. This accent for me is now about slowing down and finding a little elevation. So it's perhaps feeling more like a little swing and suspension in the middle. But I could easily accelerate towards it if I wanted to and find a stop. Maybe that's less swingy if I really find the accent to a stop though. Where else maybe can I find an accent in this movement? Maybe on the extension of the arm and the leg. This is the nearest I've got to swimming in months. To find an extension through the limbs as the accent, and then it falls to the other side. And maybe like you, like me, you're starting to get a bit tired. This is fairly exerting, and I'm definitely feeling my bones on the ground. But give it one more change of accent or change of quality, change of phrasing. I'm going to go back to a more even phrasing. And then I'm going to allow that to condense to one side, to roll me onto my back. And then play with this lateral condensing on the side now. We can find it with a bit of free flow, maybe a bit of quick time, finding that flexion extension that you did in parallel earlier, now with more participation of the upper body, head and hands, elbow condensing, slowing it down, finding it with a little bit more control. And then let's add that with a level change, so we can have from sitting, finding a body half into the ground, finding with lateral condensing, maybe rolling you to sit, lateral condensing, finding the ground, body half to body half, playing with coming out of the ground with more of this activation through the halves of the body, and now the lateral pelvic shift comes into play as you find shifting weight and shifting level might bring more of your pelvis into the activity. So it's up to you how you phrase this. Don't worry if identifying body half is not really happening as more movement takes over. Let's come back to the qualities involved. That's been the focus of the last hour. So how is it to play with the when of your movement? Quickly, slowly. How is it to play with the progression? Traveling in and out. Finding something that has more of an inner streaming or an outer streaming. How is it to play with the attention? How your focus can shift you in space. And with the intention, a sense of light weight in your body, or a sense of strong weight. Playing, again, however you would like to play. Visiting some different qualities for yourself, surprising yourself. And eventually bringing yourself to sitting, if you're not sitting already. Taking a look around your room. Maybe rubbing your hands together, connecting to the body through touch. Noticing how you feel. And let's gather together for a conversation or a check-in with any thoughts you might have or any observations you want to share.